Welcome to the Fearless Church podcast. We want to be fearless followers of Jesus that believe in the strength that community brings. We refuse to hide our fears and failures. We believe that we must go and take new ground in our faith, and we believe that there's no halfway in following Jesus. Thanks for joining us on the journey to becoming Fearless Church. This is our fourth week in our series titled Too Good to Be True. There are many stories in the Bible that center around characters with big faith. And this week, Pastor Brian uses the story of Gideon to challenge our faith and push us to go from insecurity that says, I can't, to faith that says he can.
Well, I'm going to do something a little vulnerable, something a little uncomfortable for me, and I'm going to let you know that I'm an insecure person. I'm an insecure person, and I want to go just a little farther than that because I can share with you a vague thing about insecurity in my life, but I want you to know that I struggle with, and I still struggle with, and I really struggled with growing up, just this idea of not being good enough. Like not being good enough, falling short, and it led to a fear of failure, which would lead to rejection. And that's what I struggled with. And so it's an insecurity that is in me, and it's an insecurity that has worked into my relationships, especially with my wife. And the other day, 3 weeks ago, I just want to share a story with you real quick. And yes, I did ask her permission, so it is okay. We registered. That's what we do for school. We don't actually register people for an appointment. We made appointments for our two younger daughters for a doctor's appointment. And Amy was going to go, but she ended up getting a call from her school and said, we need to come and meet together as a staff and teachers, and we need to talk through some things. So the appointment fell to me. So just like most men do, we go to the doctor and we don't ask questions, right? I really believe it's the doctor's job to tell me what is wrong, not me to tell them what I think is wrong, right? And so I didn't think about asking any questions, but my wife is really good at asking questions. And so she told me, she was like, hey, make sure you ask this question, make sure you ask this question. And pretty soon I started getting a little nervous, a little anxiety, and she called me and said, hey, make sure you ask this question. And pretty soon I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm going to fail you because I feel like I'm not going to ask all the questions that you want me to, or I will bring home some answers that may not be okay. And so I started feeling this, and so I had to talk with my wife and say, hey, look, I do feel like that I need you to send me text of these questions so that I'll remember what to ask, and then I will bring back the answers, and we'll just have to be okay with them. Because I feel this anxiety, this rejection that's possible that I'm going to fail you, and it's going to look bad, and I just won't be good enough. And so this is something that I've got to work out in my own life, and it's something that God has worked out in my salvation too, because this is some stuff that really I've just grown up with. And so I want to ask you, because I do believe that everybody in this room and online has some sort of insecurity about themselves. So what makes you insecure? Like, let's not talk about the person next to you. You think about the insecurities of your children that's in kids ministry right now, or maybe some people that you just met on Thursday at family, and you're like, man, they've not gotten out of their insecurities yet, right? So let's not think about them at all. Let's think about you. What makes you insecure? Let me ask this another way. What makes you nervous? What makes anxiety just kind of creep into your life? Or maybe what causes doubts or fears? Like, this will help us track down some insecurities that we feel about ourselves. Now, there's two types of people usually in a room: those that have chosen to follow Jesus Christ and step into salvation, and those that are just checking us out. And just like Pastor Chris said before, if you're here to check us out, we want it to make the safest place for you to just come and ask questions and just really seek where you are on this faith journey. So when those people, though, when you step into a relationship with God, God tells you who you are. And so I'm going to read some things real quick. Like, as a follower of Jesus, how do you feel when you're loved or chosen, fearfully and wonderfully made, brought near to God, redeemed and forgiven, chosen, holy and blameless, set free, made one with all who are in Christ, or accepted by God? Like, how do you deal with these truths of God when maybe you have a body image insecurity. Maybe you feel like God wants you to do something, but you don't have the talents, and so you're insecure about the talents that he didn't give you. Maybe you're insecure about your thoughts or this society or the culture that we're found in. What happens when when you're insecure about yourself, but you hear fearfully and wonderfully made? Like, how do you work with those things when we feel one thing, but God says another? What do we do when our culture is speaking division into us, and pretty soon we feel division seeping into the church, and you don't feel like you're made one with all who believe? Like, what happens when you don't even believe in God? Like, you don't even know if he loves you. Not only, like, you don't even feel like he's near. How do we wrestle with these? Because this is the one that I struggled with. How do I know I'm accepted by God when I fear failure and being rejected by God? And this is the verse that honestly would haunt me at night. Like, I started my relationship with God in the 3rd grade. And I can tell you, since the 3rd grade, there's been some sin in my life, right? I was a teenager, a Christ follower of a teenager, and there was sin there. There was sin in college when there was freedom from my parents and all these rules that I felt like I had to follow. There's been sin in my life, even though I had stepped into a relationship with Jesus. And I struggled being the firstborn and a rule follower, because this is like where people are up in front of Jesus and they say, hey, we did this in your name, we did this in your name, we did this in your name. And they hear, depart from me. I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's laws. Like, this is a verse that would haunt me. And I would sit here and go, well, honestly, I break God's laws. I do what I want to do. And so if I break God's laws and one day I'm standing before him, what if I'm rejected? You see how that insecurity in myself led to my insecurity with God. And so what do you do? What do you do when your insecurities and the truth of God clash? What do we do when we can't step into these big faith moments that we've been talking about? What happens when we feel stuck in our relationship with God, or not even started a relationship with God? What happens when our insecurities and the truth of God clash? And we've got to really wrestle with this as people in general. Like, either these things are too good to be true. If I feel one way, but God says another, I feel like they're too good to be true. And if they're too good to be true, then that means they're false. And if they're false, then honestly, we're saying God's a liar. But if we can't agree to that, if we truly believe, no, God's truthful, and if he's truthful, he's sinless, he doesn't lie, then what he says about me is true, then what if I'm my biggest problem? What do I do when we realize these insecurities in myself keep me stuck in my relationship with God? It doesn't allow me to take a step forward in this big faith, because that's the series we're in. We're in this big faith series where we saw Elijah call down fire from heaven in the first week. We saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego step into the fiery furnace, even if faith. And we saw last week where Elisha burned the plow and stepped into what God has called him to do. And he takes these steps of faith, and we really want those big faith moments. But we've got to realize that we can't get to those big faith moments until you realize that it's not about you. That's where we get locked up in our insecurity, because we're like, what? I don't know how I can do that. God made me different. I don't know if I can do this. And honestly, if you look at all the weeks of these stories, we had Elijah and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Elisha again. All of those are amazing things, but those stories weren't about them. Elijah didn't span time. It's just a story within a story. The only common factor, the only common person that's in all of these stories is God. And so it's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about Elijah, Elisha, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and it's not even about Gideon, who we're going to look at today. It's about God. So how do we do that? We've got to really wrestle with these insecurities that lock us up in our faith journey, or maybe don't even allow us to take a step of faith to even start a relationship. So if that's true, if we can say that, yes, I am my biggest problem, and to get into this big faith moment isn't about me, then where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? And I want to talk about Gideon real quick. Gideon is in the book of Judges, and I want to lay this foundation, okay, of his culture here. I want to lay what he's in, because Gideon was this man that lived in a very, pretty much a horrible time of oppression. And it says the Israelites did what was evil in the Lord's sight, so they're doing whatever they want to, and the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. I want to pause there and go, what if 2020 was only the beginning? Some of you need to repent right now because you're angry that I said that out loud. And you're like, oh no, it can't be year 1 of 7. I can't handle that. I can't handle wearing a mask because I smell my breath every day. And it is not good. Some of you are like, I can't do online school for another 6 years. I can't do it for 3 months. I didn't go into education for a reason. And it's so hard, and some are dealing with even harder things. Like, it can't be year 1 of 7 where there's uncertainty and I don't know if my job is secure. I don't know if I'm gonna have it next year. I can't go another 6 years. Some of you are like, our very livelihood, my business, it's uncertainty right now, and I can't deal another 6 years. So imagine being in an Israelite shoe, like in Gideon's shoe, where you have been oppressed for 7 years. They were so cruel that they had to find hiding places around where they lived. And it continues on, it says that they planted their crops, and when they planted their crops, these people would come and attack Israel. They'd camp in the land, destroying crops as far away as Gaza. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat. Nothing to eat. Not only that, instead of allowing them to have animals that would continue to plant crops or even to eat the animals that they owned, they took the sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. They literally left them with nothing to eat. The enemy hordes, look at how many that there were. They were thick as locusts. They arrived on droves of camels, too numerous to count, and they stayed until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation. For 7 years, this is the culture, the environment, the circumstance we find Gideon in. And so it doesn't surprise me that Gideon, when we find out where he's at, Gideon, the son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press to hide grain from the Midianites. There's this man who's living in fear. He's threshing wheat in a wine press. A wine press of that day was built into the ground. They would put the grapes into a circle up pretty much right off the top of the ground, and they'd dig a tunnel to this large cistern or a hole in the ground that was big enough for a man to really step into and hide. And this is where Gideon was. Gideon's threshing wheat in a wine press. And I don't know if you've ever threshed wheat. I haven't. But if you have, you can explain this. You don't want to be where the wind isn't. Like, you want the wind to come through and take the wheat so the grain would fall to the ground and it would be easier for you to do your job. But he's living in so much fear that he's hiding and making it harder for himself. And this is what we find him in. So the angel of the Lord shows up because the Lord heard the cry of the Israelites, and the angel looks down to Gideon and says, "Mighty hero." Another translation says, mighty man of valor. Definition of valor is courage in the face of danger. I don't know about you, but nothing that Gideon's doing right now screams or even whispers courage. And so what do we do when God calls us one thing, when God sees something in us, when God puts identity on us, but our circumstances, our insecurities, our fears and doubts of who we are, who we feel we are, lock us up into a place where we hide? Because that's where we find Gideon. And so really, in the middle of all this, I want to walk through his story because I want to kind of just land on where our insecurities come from. Like, where do they come from? And if we continue on in the story with Gideon, what we see here is he replies to the angel and says, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And I know every single person in this room and online has asked this question in one form or another. If God is good, why is he allowing this to happen? If God loves me, why is this happening? If God is with me, why do I not feel that he's near? Why? Why? And we've asked this. And you've even heard the stories, just like Gideon says. I've heard the stories how the Lord brought us out of Egypt in these big faith moments. Everyone knows about the Red Sea in this room and online because we saw Charlton Heston do it on TV. We know about what God did, but we're locked in place because we're insecure about something. And the very first place that we see these insecurities happen is our current circumstances, our present. The situation that we find ourselves in will really lock us into place because we just can't see why God would allow something to happen. And so we find ourselves just continually living and being locked up in this insecurity of where we are. So the angel goes on and says, hey, don't worry, I'll be with you. The Lord will be with you. You will rescue Israel from the Midianites as if you were one man. And Gideon says, but how can I rescue Israel? Like, do you see the mistake he's making here in the past one and in this one? Like, he's looking at himself. He's missing the chance to have a big faith moment with God. God is speaking into him, and all he can do is look into himself and his insecurity of who he believes he is. And so he's missing the chance to take this big step moment. How can I rescue Israel? And don't we ask that? How can I share the gospel at work with the guy that's sitting next to me? I don't know enough. What if he asks me questions? How can I love my spouse the way that Jesus wants me to love my spouse? Because I fail short at that all the time. How can I be fearfully and wonderfully made when I have an insecurity about myself? How can I be accepted by God when I feel like I fail him and will be rejected by God? We wrestle with the how can I all the time, that it locks us into place. And he looks back even not into his own life, but in the past. He's like, my clan is the weakest in Israel, and my family is the least in, and I'm the least in my entire family. Like, he looks in the past and says, Manasseh, my tribe has never been the strongest. So the next thing that we see here is our past. Our past plays into our insecurities too. And this is where mine started. Back in elementary school, I was never really popular. I wasn't really that smart either. So I don't know if that makes me a nerd or a geek. I don't know the true definition of that. But either way, I struggled going to school. And I struggled going to school for one guy. Like, he was always the bully. I feel like at the time, he could sense my insecurities and he would just play on that. And really, stepping back now, I do know that most bullies hide their own insecurities by playing on somebody else's insecurities. But the thing is like at the time, that started building into, maybe I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to be this guy's friend. I'm not good enough to be anybody's friend in this classroom, because he just kept making everything known. And so this insecurity would build in me, and it carry on in teenage years, college years, and even into the relationship with my spouse. So all of these things would build in me based off of my past. And it will happen to you too. Things will pop up as God continues to transform you, as he changes you. The past will come back. The feelings will come back. So he goes on, and the angel says, look, I will be with you. And Gideon says, okay, give me a sign. So the angel gives him a sign. He's scared, just like everybody would be if an angel showed up, right? And he's like, and the angel says, don't be afraid. In fact, why don't you go home, tear down this altar that your dad built to this false god that's in your front yard, and tear it down and rebuild it to me and sacrifice something on it. And so Gideon, you think, okay, here's God. You see the patience of God. You see the love of God coming out. I don't feel like this would be a very dangerous situation. Right? I'm giving you a chance to be a little courageous here, because honestly, what I would do, I'd go home and say, hey, Dad, you know that God that we felt like wasn't near to us for 7 years, that we've heard all of these things about? Yeah, an angel of the Lord showed up to me. And because of that, he told me to tear down this altar that we made and to this false god, and we should have known that, but we didn't. So let's tear it down, rebuild it, and offer a sacrifice to the one true God. I feel like that would be the next step. But as we continue to read, we see here, so Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord commanded. If we stop there, we'd be like, yes. But we got to keep reading. But he did it at night because he was afraid. He was afraid of the other members of his father's household. He's afraid of his family and the people of the town. So what happens is that we tend to fear, as we continue to walk into this, people. Other insecurities can come from people, whether they mean to or not. Like clearly the insecurity that was brought on me from early on in my past, he meant to put something on me. I was raised in a very conservative Southern Baptist household. My parents were wonderful. I had a great childhood. I felt loved and provided for and protected. I had 2 brothers. I grew up in a very good and safe household. But what I didn't see modeled correctly was resolution of conflict. So I always, when my parents had some conflict, they would go to their room and shut the door, and I wouldn't see it resolved correctly. And so with my insecurity, not on them, I'm not saying that my parents did this. This was my fault. Sometimes I think we blame others for insecurities when it's not. I found a way to hide my insecurities. Well, if my parents could hide their conflict, I can hide my own. And so I hid. I put my best face forward, and I followed the rules, and I wasn't open with my insecurity, with my family, or with others. In fact, I was a lot like Gideon. I did it by night. I just hid. I didn't step into what God was asking me to do. I wasn't vulnerable. And so as we deal with these insecurities, as we see where it's coming from, as we're really struggling with, well, if God says one thing and I feel another, we tend to start relating with God differently. Like if we rest on our insecurities and we miss the chance to take a look at God, then this is how we tend to relate to God. And so we would ask questions. God, how can I? Where are you? Why have you abandoned us? Why am I going through this? Why? We ask God questions all the time because of our insecurity. We ask for signs. And I know I'm willing to bet probably 100% people in this room and online has asked God for a sign before. God, if you just show up, sit down with me on my couch, let me see you, I'll believe. Right? We want the foolproof faith. We want the security of knowing, and that's not what faith is. And so we want that. And you know what? You'd be like, oh, I believe for the rest of my life, and that's not true. Because as humans, you'll believe for a day, maybe a week, maybe a month, and then we'll allow our circumstance in the past and all that to continually catch up with us again, and we'll doubt all over again. You want to know why I know? Because Gideon not only asked for 1 sign and it's done, he asked for 3 and it's done. And he still fears. And it's still difficult for him to accept that he's a mighty man of valor. And not only that, but he plays it safe. Like he goes by night instead of by day. And we do that too. It's like, oh, I know I'm supposed to share the gospel with the guy next to me at work, but I think I'll just pray for him. I'll ask him for prayer. That's good enough, right? We'll play it safe. Oh, I know you guys are constantly asking about getting into community and being vulnerable, but I don't know if I can handle that, so I'll just come on a Sunday morning and I'll play it safe. Like we play it safe in our relationship with God because we don't want to put our insecurities out there. We want to hide just like Gideon. But I want you to hear the patience of God. So I don't know where you are in your relationship with God. I don't know where you are on your faith journey. But I want to really say, like that song we sang where the overwhelming love, the reckless love of God, He is with us in everything we do. Like He truly continues to pursue us even though we don't pursue Him. And He does the same thing with Gideon. Even though Gideon's still fearful, He goes, okay, Gideon, here's the big faith moment for you. I've given you a little courage. I've given you a little opportunity. I've told you what I believe about you. And here's the big faith moment. I want you to take the men of Israel and I want you to fight the Midianites. The Midianites are 135,000 strong. You got 135,000 men. And he gathers the men of Israel and he gathers up 22,000. Okay, if I do the math, That's 1 in 6. So if I've got really good weapons and I've got the skills, then yes, I've seen Braveheart. We can do that, right? Like that's something that can be done. And God says, no. Remember, it's not about you. It's about me. So I'm going to thin the herd out. In fact, why don't you ask anyone that's willing to go to war, ask if they're afraid. And Gideon's like, right here. And honestly, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I would be too. I would be one of those guys that'd be like, you know what, I'm afraid, peace out, I'm gone. And I would join 12,000 men and go home that day. And now Gideon's left with 10,000. 10,000 against 135,000, that's 1 in every 13 to 14 people. Mad skills, right weapons, still doable. So God says, no, I think I need to thin it out a little more. Why don't you go take the rest of the men, the 10,000, and go down to the river, and if they dump their head in there, if they just, no fear, drink from this river, those men send home. And those that just kind of gather it up with their hands and drink from it, those are the men that I want you to take into battle with you, and you will defeat the Midianite army. So I can see Gideon here, like he's like, okay, I'm going to take them down. Boom, glad he dunked his head in, because I really wasn't sure if he could handle a weapon. Oh, not John. He's our biggest guy. Like, I need him. Oh, there goes another. Not Abraham. Oh, he was the best skilled warrior we have. And one by one, 9,700 men dunk their head in the water. It leaves Gideon with 300 men. 300. This is, Gideon's heart right now. And here's the patience of God. God goes, I'm still not leaving you. I'm still with you. I still want you to know that if you're afraid, oh, yes, Gideon's afraid, because he does exactly what God asked him to do here. He goes, if you're still afraid, take your servant and go down to the Midianite camp and just listen. And so he does. And God's patient and loving and continues to just do exactly what he needs. And he listens. And there's a man in the Midianite army that has a dream. And he shares this dream to his companion, and this is what his companion says. His companion answered and said, your dream can mean only one thing, God. And I want to pause right there. I want you to see this. Here is a nation that doesn't believe in the God of Israel. Here's a nation that's faithless, that doesn't really believe in the God that Gideon does. Yet there is a man who has lived 7 years that has oppressed Israel, that has a dream, and his companion who has oppressed Israel says, it can't be anything but God. Because this is where we have to start transforming our minds. It's not about us. God has. God has. God has. God has given Gideon, the son of Joash, the Israelite, victory over Midian and all of its allies. And something here, something transforms, something clicks in Gideon. And we know this because he continues on and says, when Gideon heard the dream and this interpretation, he didn't question, he didn't ask signs, and he didn't play it safe. He bowed in worship before the Lord. He realized, something clicked to where he realized it's not about him. It's all about God and what he's done and what he's going to do. And so he does the right thing. He worships, because at that point you can't do anything but worship. And he worships, and how do we know he's different than he returned to the Israelite camp? He doesn't play it safe. He says, get up, you 300 men. God's given us a horn, a clay pot, and a torch as weapons. Get up, for the Lord has given. Do you see the word I here anywhere? Do you see the word us? No, God has given you. It's no longer about Gideon. And so this is the point to where in your faith journey, you've got to come and honestly say, I can't get to that big faith moment until I realize it's not about me. It's not about me at all. And that's what God did for me. This is what I want you to know, that going through life the way I did with an insecurity, I don't fear that verse anymore. I don't have an insecurity that one day I'll stand before Jesus and hear, depart from me, for I didn't know you. No, I have security not in what I have done because it's not about me. It's not about my what I will do, what I won't do. It's not what I have done or haven't done. It's not about me at all. It's all about Jesus. It's all about God. Like salvation is only on the shoulders of Jesus. It's not on me at all. And that's what I want to encourage you with. It. Even if you have not stepped into this faith journey yet, it's not about you. And if you have stepped into this faith journey and you're locked up, it's not about you either. It's not about you. We play a smaller story in a bigger story. So I want to ask you, where are you stuck? Where are you stuck? What are you finding yourself in this wine press, not being able to move forward or backwards? You're just stuck. Like, do you have a hard time stepping into believing that God is real? I want to let you in on a little other something about my life with Jesus. Is he gave me a way not only to know that it was all on him, but he gave me a way to understand if I truly am following him or not. And it's not about what I've done or not done again. It's about how I love people. Jesus says, they will know you're my disciple if you love one another. It's not about what you do or don't do. It's about how you feel towards somebody. And here's the thing, is that verse is for you too. You know you're his disciple if you love other people. Where are we in that? That's the thing, is when you feel God that loves you, a hardened sinner like me, one that questions his salvation over and over and asks for signs, even though I had nothing to do with it, God says, here, I'll give you a little hint. Enter into relationships and love those that are hard. You'll know if you're my follower or not. And he does that, and it's beautiful. I can guarantee you, because I'm an introvert by nature. I love my peace and my lack of frustration when it comes to relationships. But I can't help but feel the love of God and step into the difficult relationships and to love people where they're at. And that's the way that he's been able to get me unstuck. So where are you stuck? Like, all I can encourage you to do is take the first step. Take the first step, and I want to just pinpoint the first group of people that maybe you haven't entered into a relationship with God. You got to take the first step. God's not going to come and make it foolproof, and so I want to read a verse to you. God saved you by his grace when you believed. Is it truly that simple? Yes. In third grade, I confessed with my mouth that Jesus was Lord, and I believed in my heart that God raised him from the dead, and I was saved. Salvation truly is that simple. You want to know why I know that? Because marriage is that simple. You can go down to the courthouse and get married like that. It's the relationship that follows that's so difficult. Salvation isn't anything you do. It's all on Jesus. He says, and you can't take credit for this. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things that we've done. And so we live as a society that's all we know. Like, my marriage is only going to be as good as what I put into it. If it's good things, then it'll be good. If it's bad things, it'll be bad. My job, if I go to work and I do good things, I get raises, I get promotions. If I do bad things, I get fired. We live in a society that if I obey the law and I'm good and I do good things, then I have my freedom. If I break the law, I get my freedom taken away from me. We live in a society that this is too good to be true. You got to mark out those words and just believe that it is. And step into that relationship. And then if you're the other people in the room where you're stuck, you hear about these big faith moments and you want to have them, but you don't know how to get there, take the next step. Take the next step. Don't become stuck. Don't get stagnant, because Jesus is pretty clear on what stagnation does to us. We become lukewarm. We always want to be moving as followers of Jesus. We're not doing something for salvation. We're doing something because of salvation. We're working out our salvation with fear and trembling. So take the next step. Let's go on to verse 10. For we are God's masterpiece. You are God's masterpiece. You're these Mona Lisa, his statue of David, his Sistine Chapel, whatever you want to call yourself, right? You're his masterpiece. You're uniquely and created. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. He's created you a new creation. Once you follow Christ, you're new. You're no longer your old self. And when he's created us so we can do good things that he's planned for us long ago. Another translation says, so we can walk in them. The definition of walking is moving, is taking steps. So I don't know where you are in your insecurities, where you're locked up, but God made you fearfully and wonderfully even in your insecurities. He already knows it, so take a step. Don't get stuck at the I can't. Don't get stuck at the I can't. We'll stay there all day long. I can't. How can I? How can I? How can I? And pretty soon when you realize it's not about you, you can move to the he can. Take your eyes off of yourself, look at God, and know that he can. Simply scratch out the too good to be and just know that he is. And it's true that God is real, that God loves us and created us, and pretty soon you'll take that step to the he does. You'll get to experience him in a new way, in a big faith moment. And you'll see that he does, but I want you to know, even in this, it's not about you. It wasn't about Elijah. It wasn't about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It wasn't even about Gideon. It's all about God. And so he may do it exactly how you expect him to, and he may not. But it's God. It's all about him. It's not about us. So where's your next step? Let's pray.
Thanks again for joining us today. Before you go, we want you to be aware of an opportunity to impact the community over the next couple weeks. Our big dream at Fearless is to initiate a mighty multiplication movement of God where we truly do become disciples who make disciples, working together to be a church that starts churches. We don't want to be just one church. We want to be a church that multiplies and plants churches all over the world. With that being said, we're excited to introduce our Be More offering. We will be collecting funds throughout the rest of this year to prepare ourselves to multiply, to engage unreached people groups, and to start churches. For more information, go to www.bemore.befearless.org. We would love for you to become a part of our Fearless Church family and join us for a service. Information for our on-campus and online services can be found in the podcast notes or on our website. There you can also find out about the precautions we are taking for COVID-19. We hope you will tune in with us again on the Fearless Church podcast.